Dragon Ball is a series notoriously known best for its fight scenes, notoriously known for huge power scaling arguments, and known for blowing up planets and entire solar systems or Majin Buu destroying an entire universe. A bunch of ridiculous stuff happens inside of the Dragon Ball series, and it makes sense. This is a show that's been around for the longest time, and it has set the trend for a lot of the shonen tropes that we now see in a lot of other shonen anime that have come since. But here's a question that I think I've seen asked sometimes, but not a whole lot, and people do argue it a little bit when you're in circles talking about Dragon Ball, and those that are not Dragon Ball fans might have to say that, like Dragon Ball has no skill involved, or some people that are Dragon Ball fans will go ahead and say, it does. It's not all about just who hits harder. So we're here to talk today about whether or not that is true. Does Dragon Ball involve technique? Does it heavily lean on technique, or is it just whoever hits harder is the person that wins in most scenarios for Dragon Ball? Let's go ahead and discuss it today. So I want to go ahead and actually split this in the same way that I did the Sakura video. There are three different ways that you can go ahead and take into account the way that you're looking at Dragon Ball as a whole. I want to go ahead and start with the Dragon Ball section. We'll go to Dragon Ball Z, and we'll go ahead and do Dragon Ball Super. Now let's start with Dragon Ball. If you've seen the entirety of Dragon Ball, it's kind of pretty clear cut that the series was taking kind of a mixed approach in a sense, right? Technique did matter to some extent, but Master Roshi has a panel, I'm not going to quote it exactly, where he does state that even though technique matters, at the end of the day, the person that has the greater amount of strength tends to win. And this kind of just set the trademark, or kind of set the expectation for what you should be seeing for Dragon Ball going forward. As soon as the rest of Dragon Ball kind of goes on beyond the point of where Goku trains with Master Roshi, it all becomes a point of, oh, this person is this strong, and as a result of them being this strong, they're the one that wins this fight. Technique almost never plays a part in who actually wins a fight throughout the entirety of Dragon Ball. If you can find a single situation where that's the case, then I'd love to see it. Even in the fight versus someone like King Piccolo or Piccolo Jr. or Tien, it was always a case of what is the level of strength that you have rather than what's the level of technique that you're able to go ahead and employ. I will say the fight between Tien and Goku, that did involve some form of technique, of course, because they were pretty almost dead even, really, during that fight. But even though they were supposedly dead even in that fight, you think that maybe the Turtle School's technique would have been able to give Goku an edge, or maybe the Crane School's technique would have been able to give Tien an edge, but in the end, that was just never the case. There was nothing that could differentiate them, and I think that kind of goes into talking a little bit about why power seems to be the main thing that matters, at least in the Dragon Ball section of the series. So I'm going to go ahead and give this one over to power for Dragon Ball. In Dragon Ball, if you're the more powerful person, you're the one that's most likely to win that fight. Technique does matter, but I think it's kind of a sub-layer of what matters in comparison to how, ridiculously emphasized or how ridiculously needed power is for you in that series. So that's the Dragon Ball section or segment. Let's go ahead and talk about Dragon Ball Z. Now, Dragon Ball Z is probably the most cut and dry one to me, in my opinion. Like, there's just no arguing this. There is nothing shown in regards to technique in Dragon Ball Z whatsoever, and by that I don't mean as in during fights you don't see anything in regards to technique. There's obviously technique in the way that they fight, obviously rip-off of not rip-off, but illustrations of the way they go about doing their martial arts. There's still martial arts happening whenever you go ahead if you want to see what exactly movements they're going through. They're moving very quickly, even by the standards of the way they draw it in the anime, but if you go by frame, a lot of the times you'll actually see that they're using various different martial arts styles and techniques and all that different kind of stuff during the fight. And of course, you could go ahead and also talk about the techniques that they have. There are key techniques as well, such as, of course, the Kienzan being a thing that Krillin is able to use in the Kamehameha. But regardless of that, those techniques are still dependent on power, right? So you can have as much technique as you want. You could be Mr. Satan, but if Mr. Satan is a martial arts let's just say that he's amazing at martial arts, but even though he has amazing technique, if he doesn't have the power, it doesn't mean anything. And that's kind of the entirety of what I've seen from Dragon Ball Z. Now, is this a bad thing? I want to go ahead and kind of just pause to say that I don't think it is. It's just kind of, we're dissecting it, or I'm dissecting it to see whether or not, I believe one actually matters more than the other. And I say technique so far has mattered to some extent, while power has mattered way more than that. The technique is almost as if it's an addition to the power, and it's a very small addition at that. So yeah, so far we've gone 2 for 3. I think Dragon Ball Z is 100% just power. We see that in the Saiyan saga with Raditz, with Vegeta, with Frieza, and I know someone might go ahead and say that with the Raditz situation, they were able to, of course, go ahead and take Raditz out using the special beam cannon technique. That said, this is like one of the only situations where we do see that happen inside the series, and even then, using the special beam cannon, if it wasn't for the fact that Goku was holding on to Raditz's tail, which basically like put a hard nerf on Raditz, then I'm pretty sure he still wins that fight easily, because a simple power jump of maybe 500 inside of Dragon Ball is enough for one person to absolutely batter the other person on the other side. So it's they really stood no chance if it wasn't for the fact that they kind of pulled out a little bit of teamwork there, and Raditz had a glaring weakness that they were able to go ahead and kind of latch onto and use to their advantage to make them a lot more powerful and just get them the win in that fight, even though they weren't really deserving of said win. But we move. The Vegeta situation, similar thing. Power was what really mattered. The Kaioken technique is a technique, but it's a technique that's there to boost power, funny enough. So it's one of those techniques that it's, yes, you could say the technique was useful in this scenario or case, but it's a technique that boosts the power of the person that's using it. So it's still giving a point to technique, but also still giving a point to power in this case. When you go to that section. And then from there, there's just no other situations I can think of wherein the technique has mattered more than the power. Those two beginning sections of Dragon Ball are the only arguable sections of Special Beam Cannon and the Kaioken. Everything beyond that point just leans to being power over everything. So, let's go ahead and move on to Dragon Ball Super. This is the part where things start to become more technique, and power doesn't take a back seat, but it's like, it's still there. It's still very relevant. It's actually kind of on equal footing at this point. Now, as we know, Ultra Instinct is not a power-up, but instead actually should be considered a technique. The Saiyans, though, do have their own way of going about these kinds of things. I'm not sure why it prompts a physical transformation for them to go ahead and access Ultra Instinct, but that is what happens whenever they try to access it. Or we've only seen Goku do it, but that's what happens whenever Goku tries to access it. So it's a transformation in this case that does give him a power-up, but the essence of what Ultra Instinct is definitely a technique. And power does actually take, a huge precedent in terms of the way that you handle a lot of stuff in Super, but I mean, the entirety of Super, we've been hearing Goku and Vegeta saying things like, we've reached the max of what our physical bodies are able to accomplish. Right now, what we need to work on is our mental state, our technique, this kind of thing. So, technique definitely plays a much larger part once you get to Super. Well, I think, though, that it takes a much larger part and is actually the number one de facto way for you to go ahead and win a fight. No, I'm sorry to say, I still think at this point, power still has mattered more throughout the series, maybe just by a little bit in Super, than it does for technique. Technique does matter a lot. We see it multiple times throughout the series. Whis talks about it a whole lot, talks about how their technique can be sloppy, and talks about how their mindsets can be a hindrance to the way that their power gets better throughout the series as well. But all in all, I'd say that still, even when they come across certain opponents, technique doesn't help them that much unless they have the power to go ahead and back that technique up. So far, I'm saying it's a 3 for 3 for power, but I'd say the last one and the closest one has to be where Dragon Ball Super is concerned. So, yeah, this was a little bit of an in-depth-ish analysis of, whether or not I think power or technique matters more in Dragon Ball. Go ahead and leave a like on the video if you guys enjoyed this. Subscribe. I know some people might bring up the fact that I separate into 3 parts, and if I'm pulling from the manga or the anime, because I did see someone mention in the comment section of the soccer video about the whole me pulling from the anime thing instead of the manga. If they are watching this, then just know pretty much that I do actually try to take into account both sources. So sometimes I might go ahead and pull some stuff from the manga. Sometimes I might go ahead and pull some stuff from the anime. For the soccer video, I mostly pulled from the anime because reading the Naruto manga, I haven't really had the chance to kind of just go through all of it. It takes me a little bit longer to go ahead and read. I won't lie. My attention span when it comes to reading the manga takes a bit more time than I would like it to take. Still, though, I still stand by what I say, even if I'm talking about the manga. And that goes for this video as well. Honestly, I really think power seems to matter more in Dragon Ball than technique does, which isn't really a shame, to be honest. It's fine. The fight scenes are still like absolutely amazing. Dragon Ball is still a wonderful series. So let's see where it continues to go from here. Anyways, that's it for me today. I hope to, of course, see you guys in the next video that I do. And yeah, peace out.